a guest here this evening. I was supposed to be listening, and I wasn't supposed to be speaking. And yet here I am. So I pay attention when fate shows up with twists or turns. And here I am this evening because the guest speaker has a family emergency and wasn't able to be here. So what that makes me think is that somebody, at least somebody in this room, may need to hear something that I have to say. So pay attention, because it may be you. Here we are at the New Beginnings Prosperity Ball. I love the name New Beginnings. New Beginnings speaks of hope and promise. It speaks of second and third and fourth chances. And it speaks of choices, courageous choices in challenging and difficult times. My work is all about new beginnings. As a collaborative family law lawyer, I work with families that choose to settle matters out of court. So I work with couples that work hard at creating respectful and responsible endings so that they can begin anew. I'd like to talk tonight about what it looks like and what it feels like to begin anew and to make courageous choices. Interesting that tonight is a masquerade ball, where we're given permission to and even encouraged to show up a little bit differently. Perhaps we can all leave this evening inspired to show up a little bit differently or to make new beginnings in areas of our lives that are asking for new beginnings. I'd like to share a story of a client of mine who came to me. He came to me with a broken hand. He had a cast on his hand. And when I asked him to tell me how he broke it, this is the story he told me. He and his wife had been arguing, and she had jumped on his back, piggyback style, and was pulling his hair, and he knew he needed to punch something, and he didn't want to punch her, so he ran a couple 100 yards across the field to a fence with her hanging on, and he punched the fence. And their 3-year-old son watched the whole thing. When I met him, he was addicted to prescription painkillers, and his wife had just moved out with their 3-year-old. I told him that he failed every screening test known to collaborative practice and mediation, and what was he doing in my office? I wasn't a litigation lawyer, I'm a settlement lawyer. And he said to me, I'm choosing peace. I'm a father now, I have a 3-year-old son. It's time to start doing things differently, and I want to choose peace. I don't quite know how, but I want to choose it. And from everything I've heard about you and read about you, you're the person who's going to help me do that. Now he had my attention. I could feel the little prickles on the back of my neck. He was speaking my language, and I agreed to take him on as a client, and I agreed to let him try collaborative process. Now in collaborative practice, most of the settlement work happens in meetings with both spouses and both spouses and their lawyers present. In this file, we also had a social worker present to handle some of the emotional content of the file and to ensure the safety of the 3-year-old and that good parenting decisions were being made. At one of those settlement meetings, he said something extremely hurtful to his wife. I looked across the table and could see that she had been hurt to her core. She looked like she'd been punched in the stomach, and she was ashen. I took my client out of the meeting and we went outside. As I saw her packing up, looking like she was going to leave the meeting and leave the process. We went outside, and as he pulled out a pack of cigarettes, I said to him, that was really hurtful. And he said, she was really pushing my buttons, as he pulled out a cigarette and lit it. I said, yeah, she was. She was really pushing your buttons. And what you said was really hurtful. And he took a moment and he said, you know the sad part about it? It wasn't even true. I said, huh. He said, what am I going to do about it? What are we going to do now? And I asked him if he still wanted to choose peace. And he said yes. And then I asked him, what would peace look like in this moment? And he said, probably look like an apology, and it would probably look like me admitting I was wrong, and that what I'd said was untrue. said, okay, let's go back down. So we headed back downstairs into the meeting room, and he looked his wife in the eye and he said, I'm really sorry. What I said was untrue, mean, hurtful, and I'm sorry that I said it, and I'm sorry that I hurt you. And she looked at him with tears in her eyes and said, thank you. Then she glanced over at me and said, you know, if you'd been living with us, we might not be here at this moment. He made a choice to choose peace, and they reached a settlement of their issues and signed a separation agreement. And when we parted company, I said to him, you know, you're a man of your word. You came here and you said you would choose peace, and even some difficult moments, you chose it, and I respect you for that. And I wish you well on your journey. And we hugged and parted company. Yesterday, he called me and he said, I want you to know something. Because that was about 1.5 years ago. He said, I want you to know something. About 3 months after we signed the separation agreement, my wife and I reconciled. And it's been a bumpy journey, but it's been a peaceful journey. And we're all doing really well, and our son is doing really well. And I'm long off the prescription painkillers. And I'm writing my PhD thesis right now. And things are good. And whenever things get rocky for me, or when I have a bad moment, I ask myself that question, what would peace look like in this moment? And whatever my answer is, that's the choice I make. And that's the thing about new beginnings and courageous choices. It's not something we do once, it's something we do every day. He didn't choose peace once and then live a peaceful life. He had to choose it and re-choose it thousands of times in thousands of moments. And he didn't just choose peace on a theoretical basis, he chose it by his very actions. I have another client who, after 15 years of marriage, was told by her husband that he had been unfaithful throughout the whole marriage. All 3 of their children had been born and conceived in moments of infidelity. She was devastated. She was heartbroken. She was very, very religious, and in her religion, marriage and fidelity were tenets of their religion, but so too was forgiveness. She said to me, in the midst of her rage and deep betrayal and disappointment and hurt and shock, I can't forgive him now, but I can choose to intend to forgive him. And I want you to help me to go through this process, knowing that that is my intention. I will begin a path that will lead to forgiveness. I don't know when it'll happen. This could be a life's work for me. But in any moment where revenge or vindictiveness showed up and was the easy choice, she asked, what would I do right now if I was absolutely certain that one day I would forgive this man? And then she made the choice that was consistent with that ultimate goal. I found myself facing a new beginning when my high school sweetheart and I separated and headed toward divorce. I was devastated, I was lost, I was sad, and I had lost my zest for life. A year later, I was still feeling full of despair. I felt dead inside. And I felt as if I had stopped living. And I found myself in the Newman Center, a small church on the University of Toronto campus, and it was an Advent service. And Advent is the 4 weeks before Christmas. There are 4 Advent services, and this happened to be one of them. And when I walked in, the church was pitch black, and there were unlit candles all along the pews. And when the Mass started, the priest lit a candle at the front, and one by one, everybody shared that flame with the person next to them until the whole church was aglow. And in that glow, I looked down at the church bulletin, and on the back of the church bulletin, there was a quote by Martin Luther King. "Only in the darkness can you see the stars." And I made a decision at that moment to look for the stars in the darkness, to look for the gifts of the night. And in that moment, I chose to begin to live again. And since I knew I had always wanted to ballroom dance, I got myself into a ballroom dance studio that following week, and I walked in for my first lesson. Now, when our choices and our new beginnings lead us closer to our most passionate and authentic selves, we will be met with resistance. And I was met with resistance as I headed into that studio. I wanted to turn around and walk out. And as I worked on the ballroom dance frame, which you'll see later tonight, not by me, but there's some ballroom dancers performing, the ballroom dance frame is sort of the opposite of the body language of shame. With shame, we're small and crouched and trying to make ourselves look invisible. The ballroom dance frame is large and grand and full of pride. And I struggled with that as I was learning to ballroom dance. But I had this image that I wanted to avoid, and the image was that at the end of my life I would walk through those pearly gates of heaven and be greeted by my angel saying, "What happened? We thought you knew. We tried to give you signs." And what I didn't want that to happen. And so my question that I asked myself was, what would I choose? What's the choice that will lead to freedom and passion? And so I started making those choices on the dance floor and in my life that would lead to greater freedom from the limitations and restrictions that I had set for myself, one of which was that I didn't think I deserved a second chance at happiness. I thought I'd used mine up. And so I started to give myself permission to have a life of happiness. If we don't ask ourselves these questions, if we don't have a guiding question, like, what would peace look like in this moment? What would forgiveness look like in this moment? What would freedom and passion look like in this moment? Our excuses can start to create our lives for us, rather than our most authentic selves. This summer, after I had put Dance Me Beautiful out in the world, it started to kick up a notch. So Dance Me Beautiful was a book that I had written when I was learning to ballroom dance, and it was a book about my journey through fear and shame and doubt into my own inner strength and beauty and confidence. And so I had put this book out in the world, and it started to get some attention, and it got a Rising Star Award, and there was talk by the publicist of doing an interview on Good Morning America, and I started to have that fear and doubt show up again. And in that moment, I happened to be going to visit my mother in the hospital. She'd had a heart attack the day before that was very unexpected. And after we sort of exhausted talking about all the things one can talk about in the hospital about a heart attack and the medical condition, and her prognosis was really positive, she changed the subject and asked me anything new about your book. And I said, yeah, you know what, I'm feeling a lot of doubt and I'm feeling a lot of fear, and this story is a really personal, vulnerable story, and now I've put it out in the world, and do I really want my colleagues reading this book? Do I really want my clients reading this story? Do I really want to go on television and talk about this stuff? I really started to question myself. And wisdom, when it's coming from a hospital bed, from somebody who was hooked up to all these machines and everything at that point, measuring everything, comes in pretty strong. And she said, you put this book out in the world, you put yourself out in the world, and the universe is saying a resounding yes. Now your job is to ride this wave for all it's worth. It doesn't matter what happens, but you ride that wave without holdback, without limitations, without doubt, without fear, or you'll have regrets. And so I had to push through my resistance to putting the book out in the world in the same way that I had to push through my resistance in learning to ballroom dance. Fear busting, as I like to call it, is not for the faint of heart. It takes courage and it takes energy. And one of the themes of the book Dance Me Beautiful is about a butterfly, and feeling like a butterfly trapped in a cocoon and having to work so hard to break free and fly. And I'd like to share a short story about a butterfly that a woman had come upon, and she saw it in its cocoon, and she could see the movement inside the cocoon as this butterfly was trying to break free. And after about an hour of watching all this struggle, the struggle seemed to stop. And she worried that the butterfly wasn't going to get out of its cocoon. So she took a pair of scissors and she cut the cocoon open to free the butterfly. And she watched the butterfly crawl out of the cocoon